Today, you've given me just a fantastic mix of sources to work with, news articles, analyst opinions, even some technical analysis. So I'm really excited to understand where this all leaves MicroStrategy.
Yeah, it is a great time to be looking at MicroStrategy, especially with all the recent developments surrounding spot Bitcoin ETFs and kind of their whole approach.
Exactly. I mean, is MicroStrategy stock still a good way to invest in Bitcoin now that ETFs are an option? Or are ETFs just the better bet now? And what is the deal with some analysts calling MicroStrategy an investment bank for Bitcoin?
It's an interesting take, for sure. I think a good place to start is with MicroStrategy isn't just passively holding Bitcoin. They're creating this whole suite of Bitcoin-linked products. Their stock, convertible bonds, even potentially preferred shares.
So instead of just being one way to bet on Bitcoin, they're kind of offering options for different types of investors, right? Like a menu with various levels of risk and reward.
Exactly. It's this diversification that makes them more like a financial institution than just a typical company with Bitcoin on its balance sheet. They're appealing to folks who want direct exposure through their stock, but also to those who might prefer something a little bit more structured, like a bond with a Bitcoin twist.
But wouldn't that make them less attractive now that there are dedicated Bitcoin ETFs?
The premium that MicroStrategy stock typically trades at, compared to its Bitcoin holdings, might shrink because of ETFs. But there are a few things to consider. The premium won't disappear entirely. Lack of management fees for shareholders and their software business generating a kind of reverse fee.
So it's like getting a little bonus on top of your Bitcoin exposure.
So even with ETFs in the picture, MicroStrategy still has some unique advantages. It's kind of like comparing a specialty boutique to a big box store. Both can sell you a t-shirt, but the experiences are totally different.
Yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. But this investment bank concept, how does that really play out in practice? Are they really doing things differently from, say, a Bitcoin mining company?
Absolutely. They've been making some moves that really support this idea. For example, they've increased their authorized share counts, both common and preferred, which gives them more flexibility to raise capital and potentially issue even more equity tied to Bitcoin.
That shows they're not just buying Bitcoin. They're strategically setting themselves up to issue different kinds of Bitcoin-linked securities. And didn't they recently announce a $2 billion offering of perpetual preferred shares? Could those have a Bitcoin conversion feature?
That's definitely on the table, and it would be another example of them catering to a different investor profile, one that wants a fixed income-like product, but still tied to Bitcoin's performance. And here's where it gets really interesting. They're also looking at stock splits, potentially to make those preferred shares even more accessible to smaller investors.
It's like they're creating a ladder with different entry points into the Bitcoin market. But if they're becoming this financial hub for all things Bitcoin, doesn't that increase their risk too?
It does, and there are a couple of layers to that risk. Of course, their fate is inherently tied to Bitcoin's volatility. If Bitcoin crashes, MicroStrategy is going to feel the pain. But there's also the risk that regulators might not be thrilled about this kind of unconventional approach. They could try to impose rules that restrict MicroStrategy's business model.
And what about those preferred shares? There's no guarantee that investors will buy into them, especially those seeking stability, right? It's a relatively new offering in the Bitcoin world, so it remains to be seen how much demand there will be.
All valid points, and it shows just how important it is to look at MicroStrategy through multiple lenses. We need to consider their stock's performance, their Bitcoin holdings, the software side of the business, their potential as this investment bank, and the regulatory landscape.
It's a complex picture for sure, but it's definitely a captivating one. And you've got my head spinning with this whole investment bank idea. So what other tools do they have in their toolbox?
They could potentially offer negative coupon convertible bonds linked to Bitcoin. Basically, the issuer pays a lower interest rate than the market rate. But here's the catch. The bond can be converted into stock at a specific price, known as the conversion premium. And that premium is key because it makes those lower interest rates more palatable.
So MicroStrategy could potentially raise a ton of capital at a super low cost while still giving investors a way to benefit from Bitcoin's potential upside. It's almost like alchemy turning debt into Bitcoin-powered growth.
It's a bold strategy, that's for sure. And it perfectly illustrates how they're thinking outside the box, pushing the boundaries of traditional finance to create this whole new way to invest in Bitcoin. But before we get too carried away with these innovative products, we need to look at another key piece of the puzzle. Microstrategy's software business. It's easy to get really caught up in the Bitcoin side of things, but MicroStrategy's roots are in software and data analytics. They've actually been around for decades, and that experience could give them a real edge as they build this investment bank for Bitcoin.
It's like they have this whole other engine running in the background, powering their operations and, potentially giving them insights that pure Bitcoin players might just completely miss. But how does that software side really tie into their Bitcoin strategy? Are there any synergies there?
There are a few angles to consider. First, their software business generates that cash flow, which they can then use to buy more Bitcoin. It's like the self-fueling cycle. But there's also a deeper connection, especially with their recent push into AI.
You're talking about that AI product they launched for data applications. Could that somehow link to their Bitcoin ambitions? It seems like a little bit of a stretch at first.
It might seem that way at first, but think about it. MicroStrategy's expertise is in helping businesses make sense of data. What if they apply that expertise to the world of Bitcoin and blockchain? Imagine tools that help institutions analyze blockchain data, assess risk, or even manage their Bitcoin holdings.
So they could use their software to build the infrastructure for institutional adoption of Bitcoin, becoming the go-to platform for companies that want to get involved but don't know where to start.
Exactly. It's like they're bridging the gap between traditional finance and the world of crypto. And remember that whole DeFi movement, decentralized finance built on blockchain. MicroStrategy, with their data analytics prowess and their massive Bitcoin treasury, could be a major player in that space.
Wow. It's starting to feel like we're talking about two companies in one, a Bitcoin powerhouse, A&D, a software and AI innovator. Are they trying to have their cake and eat it too?
Maybe. Or maybe they see those two sides as complementary, each strengthening the other. It's definitely a unique approach, and it's all playing out against the backdrop of this whole spot Bitcoin ETF frenzy. We already seen how ETFs could impact MicroStrategy's premium. But could they actually pose a bigger threat? If ETFs become the preferred way to invest in Bitcoin, wouldn't that undermine MicroStrategy's whole strategy?
That's a great question. ETFs are definitely a game changer. But MicroStrategy is betting that they can offer something different, something more than just a way to track Bitcoin's price. They're building an ecosystem, a whole suite of products and services tailored to different needs and risk appetites. It's like comparing a basic index fund to an actively managed portfolio with the star manager at the helm. Both offer exposure to a specific market, but the approaches are vastly different.
That's a great analogy. And speaking of star managers, we can't forget about Michael Saylor, MicroStrategy's CEO. He's been the driving force behind their Bitcoin strategy, and his conviction seems unshakable.
He's become kind of a Bitcoin evangelist, hasn't he? He's constantly talking about Bitcoin as digital gold, a superior store of value in a world of inflation and uncertainty. But is it all just hype, or is there real substance to his vision?
That's the million-dollar question, and there's no easy answer. But what's clear is that Saylor is playing a long game. He's not just trying to make a quick buck. He's betting on a fundamental shift in the global financial system with Bitcoin at the center.
And he's putting MicroStrategy's money where his mouth is. Remember that $750 million stock sale agreement they have in place? That could fuel even more Bitcoin purchases down the road.
Right, and they're not afraid to use debt strategically to acquire more Bitcoin. Saylor sees this as like a once-in-a-generation opportunity, and he's willing to take risks to capitalize on it. But with great risk comes great reward. And MicroStrategy has the potential to be either a spectacular success story or a cautionary tale.
It's a high-stakes game, and the stakes are getting even higher with this upcoming Bitcoin halving. We briefly touched on this earlier, but could you remind our listener why the halving is so important, especially in the context of MicroStrategy?
Sure. The Bitcoin halving is a pre-programmed event that happens roughly every 4 years. Basically, the reward for mining Bitcoin gets cut in half, which reduces the rate at which new Bitcoin enters circulation. This reduction in supply, combined with growing demand, is expected to drive up Bitcoin's price. Now, this is relevant to MicroStrategy because they hold so much Bitcoin. If the price goes up, their holdings become more valuable. It's simple math, but the implications are huge.
It's like they're leveraging the halving event to potentially supercharge their returns. But wouldn't everyone holding Bitcoin benefit from the halving? What makes MicroStrategy's position unique?
Well, they're not just passively holding Bitcoin, they're actively building this investment bank infrastructure, creating products and services that could attract even more capital into the Bitcoin ecosystem. They're not just riding the wave, they're trying to shape it.
It's a bold strategy, and it'll be fascinating to see if they can pull it off. But let's not forget the risks. We talked about Bitcoin's volatility and the regulatory landscape, but there's also the risk that their investment bank model just doesn't work. What if investors aren't interested in these more complex Bitcoin products? What if the demand just isn't there?
That's a valid concern. There's no guarantee that preferred shares or negative coupon convertible bonds will be a hit with investors. If those products flop, MicroStrategy's ability to raise capital and continue buying Bitcoin could be seriously hampered. And let's not forget the competition.
You mean other companies trying to do similar things? Creating Bitcoin-linked financial products or building platforms for institutional adoption?
Exactly. MicroStrategy isn't the only player in this game. There are plenty of other companies vying for a piece of the pie, and some of them have really deep pockets and established reputations in the financial world.
So MicroStrategy is facing challenges on multiple fronts. The inherent volatility of Bitcoin, the unpredictable nature of regulators, the unproven demand for the more complex products, and fierce competition from other players. It's starting to feel like a high-wire act.
It is, and that's why it's so crucial to look at MicroStrategy with a critical eye, to weigh the potential rewards against the very real risks. We can't just get swept up in the excitement of their vision. We need to understand the complexities of their situation and make informed decisions based on solid analysis.
Okay, so we've talked about the big picture, their investment bank ambitions, the software side of the business, the risks they face, and the competitive landscape. But let's bring it down to earth a bit and talk about their stock. How's MicroStrategy's stock actually performing, and what do the charts tell us about its potential trajectory?
That's where the technical analysis comes in. You provided some interesting insights from Avi Gilbert, a technical analyst who specializes in Elliott wave theory.
Right. And for our listener who might not be familiar, Elliott wave theory is basically a way of analyzing market cycles based on these recurring patterns of investor psychology. It can get pretty complex, but it essentially tries to predict future price movements based on these wave patterns.
Exactly. And Gilbert has been applying this theory to MicroStrategy's stock chart, and he's come up with some observations that are worth exploring. He believes that MicroStrategy is currently in a corrective phase, a pullback after a strong run-up, but he sees this as a setup for a potential surge higher.
So it's like they're taking a breather before launching into the next leg of the rally.
That's one way to look at it, but here's where Elliott wave theory gets really interesting. Gilbert doesn't expect this upward move to be a straight shot. He anticipates a series of smaller waves within this larger upward trend.
So there'll be some bumps along the way, but the overall direction is still up.
That's the general idea. And what's particularly intriguing is that Gilbert has identified specific price levels that he believes will act as support and resistance.
Support and resistance. Those are the price points where the stock tends to either bounce off or stall.
Precisely. And Gilbert sees these levels as key indicators of whether his bullish scenario is playing out as expected. If the stock breaks above a certain resistance level, it could signal further upward momentum. And if it drops below a support level, it could be a warning sign that the rally is losing steam.
So it's like a roadmap with potential pit stops and detours along the way. But it's important to remember that technical analysis is just one piece of the puzzle. We need to consider it alongside the fundamental analysis of MicroStrategy's business, their Bitcoin strategy, and the overall market sentiment.
Absolutely. It's all about combining different perspectives to create a more comprehensive and nuanced view of the situation. And speaking of different perspectives, we came across another intriguing idea that connects back to MicroStrategy's software business and their potential role in the Bitcoin ecosystem. It has to do with the concept of Bitcoin as a non-sovereign store of value and how MicroStrategy might be positioning themselves to capitalize on this trend.
Okay, so before we wrap things up, you mentioned this intriguing idea connecting MicroStrategy's software business to Bitcoin as a non-sovereign store of value. What's the thinking there?
Well, it's all about this growing need for secure and transparent ways to store wealth that are outside the traditional financial system. Think about it. Geopolitical uncertainty, inflation fears, concerns about government overreach, these are all driving people to seek alternative assets.
And Bitcoin, with its decentralized nature and finite supply, fits that bill for many. But where does MicroStrategy's software come into play?
Imagine this MicroStrategy develops software solutions that make it easier for individuals and institutions to manage their Bitcoin holdings. Not just simple wallets, but tools that address security compliance accounting, even tax implications, all tailored to different needs and regulatory environments.
So they're not just betting on Bitcoin's success. They're building the tools to make it more accessible, more manageable, and ultimately more attractive to a wider range of users.
Exactly. They could become this trusted bridge between the often intimidating world of crypto and those seeking a haven from traditional finance's uncertainties.
It's like they're saying, hey, we're not just holding a ton of Bitcoin. We're building the ecosystem that will make you want to hold it too.
That's a powerful message, especially in a world where trust in those traditional institutions is eroding.
Now, that is a fascinating takeaway. But before we let you go, I have one final thought to leave with you. If MicroStrategy truly succeeds in building this investment bank for Bitcoin and becomes this dominant force in the crypto ecosystem, what could that mean for the future of finance as we know it?
Now, that's a question worth pondering. Will they challenge traditional financial institutions? Will they reshape how we think about money and value? Will they usher in a new era of financial inclusion, or will they face a regulatory crackdown? The possibilities are both exciting and a little bit daunting.
I guess only time will tell. But one thing's for sure, MicroStrategy's journey is like a microcosm of this larger crypto revolution, full of innovation, disruption, and a healthy dose of uncertainty.
It's a story worth following, and we'll be here to help you navigate the twists and turns along the way.
Thanks for joining us. We'll be back soon with another insightful exploration. Until then, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.